name is Sam Mwanda, the Executive Director for Uganda Wildlife Authority. This month, on the 27th of September, we'll be celebrating the World Tourism Day, and we are going to spend some time talking about that function and how tourism is important for our country. The Uganda Wildlife Authority is the institution of government that is responsible for managing of wildlife protected areas. It was formed in 1996, and it was a merger between the Game Department and the Uganda National Parks then. You need also to know that conservation of wildlife in Uganda formally started in 1926, and we've been doing the work first out of the wildlife reserves, and we've been managing wildlife since then. We manage 10 national parks currently and 12 wildlife reserves, and then give support to people who are managing community wildlife areas and wildlife sanctuaries. Our work focuses on what I would call 5 major pillars. We look at the ecosystem management, ensuring the habitat for the wildlife is okay, healthy, running. We also do wildlife resource management, where we deal with the wildlife itself, ensure that it is in a healthy situation. And then we do ecological monitoring and research. This helps us make decisions that are scientific, that are based on data that we collect. And then we work with the communities, community conservation, raising awareness, dealing with human-wildlife conflicts, doing enterprises so that people can benefit from the wildlife that they have on their places. And lastly, we do tourism and business development, and this is really the reason for this interview. And here we focus on providing the products and the services that people can visit our parks, can visit our reserves, can enjoy the time there. They have people who are guiding them, they have where to sleep, where to have a meal, and they are able to really benefit and enjoy the time they spend in a conservation area. All protected areas, the 22 that I have mentioned, are located in communities. They are protected areas, but the neighbors are communities. So if you are going to protect those wildlife that are in those areas, you need to have the communities on your side working with you. So we employ them as rangers, we employ them as guides, we employ them as wardens and directors. That's first and foremost. But we can only employ a certain number. Currently our staff is about 2,250 in number. But we need more Ugandans to be benefiting from wildlife conservation. So we then talk about communities doing their own tourism activities, either in their protected areas. We talk about them supplying the food and other things that the lodges that will need. We talk about the communities providing transport for the tourists. And then we then work with them to also address human-wildlife conflict, because the wildlife that is in the parks actually gets out and creates challenges for the communities. And so we work with them to ensure that that is addressed. And then on top of that, we provide projects that are for livelihood, for income generation for these communities. So the issue is that it's not starting now. We've been engaging the communities of the long time. Currently, These protected areas are doing fairly well. One needs to know that we had fairly big numbers of wildlife prior to the 1970s. And then in the 1970s, the protected areas were degraded. Most of the wildlife was cleared, killed, sold for ivory, for skins, for meat. And by 1985, we had reduced, in general terms, to only 10% of the wildlife we had before. And then we started working systematically to, one, stop the poaching, two, to stop the encroachment, and three, to put value in this wildlife. And I can tell you that right now our numbers of wildlife have grown, and some of them are actually higher than pre-1970. Like the Uganda Cob, that was about 70,000 at that time, we have over 110,000. And so the numbers have grown, the gorilla numbers have also grown. We have more than 500 in Uganda, out of the roughly 1,000 that we have in the whole world for the mountain gorillas. Incidentally, they only happen to be in Uganda, in Rwanda, and the DRC. So if we have over 500, we have more than 50% of the mountain gorilla species numbers in the world. And then we have seen that encroachment has reduced, poaching has reduced, and that's why we are seeing the numbers go up. Also, the benefit that the communities are getting has grown, and so we have support that we get from the communities in addressing the issue of poaching, because we are working directly with the communities on that. The challenges are many. Poaching is one of them. The other one is limited funding. When we talk poaching, it goes hand in hand with illegal wildlife trade. The other one is limited funding to do the work that we should do. And in terms of what we are doing, to deal with poaching, we have intelligence, we have people who are picking up information that we follow up and use to either create awareness among the communities, or if we are not creating awareness, then we are going ahead and arresting the people who want to do poaching. And then the intelligence informs law enforcement that goes out to do the arrests. The law enforcement hands over to investigations. Investigations then investigates and prepares a court file that is later sanctioned, normally by the state attorney on behalf of the DPP. And then we have a prosecution arm that actually goes in court and urges the case out in court. So we have those four arms working very closely together: intelligence, law enforcement, investigations, and prosecution, to ensure that we reduce poaching. But at the same time, we also go out and create awareness among the communities who are often misled. And then we work with lots of other government agencies, especially to reduce illegal wildlife trade. We are working with the UPDF, with police, with the URA, with immigration, with Financial Intelligence Agency, with our Ministry of Tourism, Wildlife and Antiquities, with the NEMA, with the National Forest Authority. So we are working in what we call the National Wildlife Crime Coordination Task Force to ensure that together we stop the poaching. Then the other thing is to work with the communities to provide them livelihood projects, so that together with them, when they see benefit, they are able to work to prevent the illegal wildlife activities. And that we do through the revenue sharing, the resources that we pick 20% according to the law of our entry figures, entry fees, 20% we put it aside, and put that into community projects that helps us. So we work that way to try and address the problem. Now, there is a new law, the law, the Wildlife Act 2019 provides for compensation, and the compensation is something that we hope we'll be able to implement soon. The regulations are almost ready. We are waiting for the first Parliamentary Council to finalize them. When they are done, the minister will sign them, and we'll be able to provide compensation in another way to engage the communities and reduce illegal activities.
My name is Leon Chandia, Acting Principal Wildlife Officer, responsible for conservation planning and partnerships. Pleased to share with you the status of wildlife conservation in Uganda today and beyond the COVID-19 pandemic recovery period. COVID has affected us like many other parts of the world, in Africa and beyond. Due to COVID, we have lost a number of lives. COVID has disrupted the normal ways of life, in addition to having catastrophic impact on conservation of wildlife in African countries, including Uganda. Uganda is referred to as the Pearl of Africa, and it is very, very rich in biodiversity, which is found in the waters, on the land, and this abundant and diverse wildlife includes, among others, the rare species, rare and endemic species like the great apes. The great apes cover the mountain gorillas and the chimpanzees. And approximately 10% of our country has been set aside as the place for conserving wildlife. Because of this richness and diversity of Uganda's biodiversity, most of our tourism is largely based on nature. And the tourism industry is the leading source of foreign exchange earner for Uganda, generating 1.5 billion US dollars annually before the COVID period. And this represents 9% of Uganda's GDP. In terms of the people working in the sector, the industry employs more than 700,000 people directly. And in terms of conservation, the tourism receipts that are generated from activities in the protected areas are used directly in conserving our wildlife. And our implementing agency, that is Uganda Wildlife Authority, derives 90% of its revenues from the tourism activities which take place in our national parks and the reserves. At the onset of the pandemic, the visitation to national parks and the reserves dropped significantly, at some point to almost zero. And from there, averaging from a monthly average of 25,000 in the past. Because of the impacts of COVID on the population, the communities were hit hard. Poaching for meat, game meat increased, and also illegal activities related to the access of other livelihood resources like firewood and so on increased. And this greatly affects the conservation status of our wildlife species. Up to now, this trend is still continuing, and we are faced with the challenges of handling wildlife criminal suspects during this period of coronavirus. This is complex because handling the suspects, interacting with them, poses the challenges of spreading the COVID-19 virus. More importantly for the world, this global pandemic and its possible scientific origins have brought us face how devastating the impact of wildlife trade can be. Uganda and their neighbors have experienced firsthand how similar pandemics have affected communities In the previous decade, we have had pandemics, and we have Ebola. Because of Ebola, our tourism crashed. Because of other pandemics like epidemics like Marburg, our tourism crashed. And this has effects on the communities because directly and indirectly, they are the beneficiaries of tourism receipts. It is therefore important that as we begin to control and live with the COVID-19 virus, we rededicate ourselves to combat wildlife crime. Most critical towards this will be strengthening our national legislation and the capacities to ensure that there is wildlife justice, and an end is brought to illegal wildlife resource and trade.
My name is Hakim Chizito. I work as a statistician for the Ministry of Tourism, Wildlife and Antiquities. I also work as the Monitoring and Evaluation Officer for the Handcrafts and Souvenirs Development Project in Uganda. Okay, we have a project for development of handcrafts and souvenirs within this country. This project was launched in August 2019 by our State Minister by then, Honorable Chiwanda. It is a project that is funded by the Enhanced Integrated Framework, that is EIF. The main purpose of the project is to create linkages between handcraft producers, traders, and exporters within the country. It is also supposed to help support the sector to drive to increase production and the quality of products that the handcrafts and souvenirs producers are making, and also to boost the exports of these producers. Okay, the monuments, particularly monuments, are under a different department in our ministry, that is the Museums and Monuments Department. They're the ones that deal with monuments. For example, we have different museum sites, different monuments in Balonyo, in Fort Patiko. Those are cultural heritage sites. That's what monuments are for. So it is a bit different from the Handcrafts project, but those monuments are also under this ministry, and they are managed by our Museums and Monuments Department. Okay, one of the things that we have done in this project is we have carried out several trainings. We have carried out trainings in quality management systems. We have carried out trainings in leadership and governance. You find that a lot of the people who are producing these crafts, they produce one by one. Groups, they are a bit informal. So we are trying to formalize them. This will help give them more bargaining power. You find that a lot of the times the people who sell, maybe on Uganda Road or elsewhere, they get these crafts from our neighboring countries instead of getting from our producers within the country. So, and even when they do get from our own producers within the country, there is a little bit of less bargaining power for them, because they are producing from home, they are maybe not well organized in groups and companies. So we are trying to strengthen that. That is the linkage that I'm talking about between the producers and the traders and the exporters. Apart from the trainings, another thing that we have done, we are upgrading their tools. When we did a baseline survey at the beginning of the project, we realized that many of these people are using more rudimentary tools other than the advanced tools that our neighboring countries and abroad that are using. So we're helping provide them with more tools, better tools. On top of that, we are constructing a production center that is in Masindi, right near the gate to Queen Elizabeth National Park, to Murchison Falls rather, National Park. We are constructing for them a production center which will help bring together all producers of crafts within that region to come and produce and showcase and exhibition. Okay, when it comes to raw materials, we are basically doing two things. The first thing is we're developing standards for the craft. So far we are developing standards for 7 crafts, including baskets and mats. So these standards, one of the things that they involve is specifying the types of raw materials that are supposed to be used in these crafts. That is the first thing. Secondly, we're encouraging the producers to do replanting. You see, when you go and you use a tree, for example, you fell a tree in order to get raw materials, if you do not replant, the next time you need to produce again, you have to go further and further away to get those raw materials. So we're encouraging them to replant so that they're able to regrow and get their raw materials from themselves. That is what we are trying to do with them. What we are doing, what we have done actually, is we have developed a branding and marketing strategy. That's one of the things, the first things that we did within this project. This branding and marketing strategy, it's helping these producers to know how do you brand your product, how do you make sure that you have consistency in your products. If you're making, say, key holders, how do you make 10 key holders that meet exactly the same standard? How do you brand them? How do you market them? We're also helping them create a website. We're going to create a large website whereby as many as possible producers can come in and market their products, sell them online, are able to reach a market not just in Uganda but within the region and globally. Obviously, the pandemic has been a very, very big challenge, not only for this project but for the entire handcrafts and souvenirs sector as a whole. You find that because no tourists, fewer tourists are coming in, these people are not able to sell their crafts because a lot of them, they produce and they sell along our tourism circuits, either on the way to national parks or at the National Theatre or at the Uganda Museum. So it has really been a big challenge for them. However, we believe that this project is going to help this sector recover from the pandemic. The way we're doing this is with the project interventions that we have. We're also planning to have a national expo for handcrafts and souvenirs. It was actually supposed to happen this year, but because of the various lockdowns and restrictions in movement, we have not been able to have that. But we hope that now that the lockdowns and the restrictions are easing, we shall be able to have that. That expo will help boost this sector because it will expose all of the producers and their products and the major most selling crafts in the country to the whole world, to the country, to Africa. As I said, we were supposed to have the expo. Although we may not be able to have that, we're still going to be able to launch our various publications. I've previously talked about the branding and marketing strategy. We have the export manual that we also developed. We have the code of conduct. So we are going to be able to launch all of those publications and disseminate them to the public because we have various stakeholders within the tourism and hospitality sector that have a vested interest in how crafts are operating, in how this business and this sector moves, i.e. tour operators, hoteliers, tour guides, and other private sector entities. We encourage all Ugandans to promote crafts ourselves. Our neighbors in Kenya, Tanzania, even other African countries such as Ghana, they embrace their crafts, they embrace their cultural heritage and these traditions. And the only way that this sector is going to be boosted is if we as Ugandans come up and buy these products. We wear these Ugandan-made clothes, Ugandan-made accessories. That is the way that we're going to boost it. We're going to boost this sector and boost tourism within the country.
My name's Rosemary Kobutaji Twinamugisha. I'm the Commissioner for Tourism Development, and I also stand in for the position of Acting Director for Tourism, Wildlife and Antiquities. So I wear two hats in driving the tourism agenda in the country. In regards to developing tourism, we have many levels at which we are making interventions. The first level is with product development. We are developing products, diversifying products. As you know, Uganda is a wildlife-based tourism destination primarily. So right now we are focusing on other offers like cultural tourism. Under cultural tourism, we are building new museums and also rehabilitating new old cultural sites. For instance, the Mugaba Palace in Mbarara, it has been renovated. Within a month's time, it will be open to the public. And we are rehabilitating our National Museum into a new digitalized as well product. We are now responding to COVID, okay? Primarily it has been visiting on site physically with a guide, but now we are going to upgrade it and modernize it, and it's digital. You can make a self-guide and you can also be guided on virtual media platforms. We are also working on the Kaguru Hills. We are developing this primarily for people who like mountain hiking and climbing. Okay, so we are putting steps and a reception center as one of the products. We are also working towards developing the source of the Nile into a world-class heritage site. We've done feasibility studies, and we have now reached the level of developing the sites. Very soon we shall start with the piers for the boats, and it's a long-term development project, and it will involve the external help. We look forward to attracting foreign direct investment into this to make it into a world heritage site. It will have a marina, it will have a cultural center, it will have a hotel with an exhibition center, it will have play parks for the children, and generally it will exhibit the culture of the Nile region. When I talk about the Nile region, we talk from Uganda, Sudan, Ethiopia, up to Egypt, because those are the people that benefit from the Nile and where it traverses. Other developments that are in the pipeline, we are going to develop the Mahatma Gandhi Convention Center in Entebbe. This one is primarily for developing MICE. MICE is meetings, incentive travel, conferencing, and events. That is one new angle of tourism that we are taking on as a country. We've been doing quite well in that area. If you may recall, we've just hosted the World Health Summit, okay, and other big international events. Maybe if you can remember the Commonwealth Summit we had years back. So we are developing capacity for the conferencing side of business. The Mahatma Gandhi Convention Center in Entebbe will have an auditorium of 5,000 persons sitting at one sitting, and several breakout rooms. It will also act as an exhibition space. Right now, the exhibition space, you all know, is the Lugogo Showground. But this one will also have a very modernized exhibition space. And it will also have a 5-star, a 150-bedroom 5-star hotel. Yes, so, and there are so many developments in the accommodation sector. Here in Kampala alone, in the next week, we shall launch the Onomo brand. It's a South African brand. It's for business. It's a business hotel with a capacity of approximately 150 rooms. If you look at the Kampala skyline, we are expecting opening soon of the Kampala Hilton Hotel and the Kampala Marriott Hotel in Zambia. Hilton Hotel is in Nakasero, so we are bringing in the big brands. We have also the private sector in the protected areas. When I talk of protected areas, I mean in the national parks. We've just had commissioning of the Chempundu camp in Chibale Forest. We have and other, like 3 new products in Bwindi, like the Gorilla Lodge. Yes. So really there is momentum going in the sector of tourism. For the recovery period, primarily we have been implementing the SOPs, okay? We developed the standard operating procedures for all our tourism businesses, whether they are tour operators, they are the hotels, lodges and restaurants, and even private car rentals. We have developed SOPs and we have disseminated them. We've partnered with the private sector to have vaccinations for our core staff. And with the Auto is the Uganda tour operators, and soon the Hotel Owners Association will also start a program for vaccinating their own staff, complementing what the government is doing so that we have our whole tourism value chain protected. Yes. The biggest challenge we are facing right now is the low influx of inbound tourists, people coming from abroad coming into here. And we have hired market destination representatives in Europe, in the Americas, in the Middle East, in China, and in India, primarily to source markets for us, to source people that can come and tour Uganda. That is one area. We have also made a brand Uganda, a tourism brand. It will soon be launched. We are repositioning and recasting our image, and we hope that will bring in the needed tourist arrivals that we are looking at. For the Ugandans, love your country, visit your country. We have made publications, okay, for visiting. We have the Tourism Services Directory. This one is for southwestern Uganda. We have for eastern Uganda, we've made for western Uganda, and we are going to make also for northern Uganda and central Uganda. We are going to cover the whole country. We've made maps, okay? We've made maps, tour maps, to allow you to be able to visit by yourself. You don't need a tour operator, and I encourage you yourselves. We have given you itineraries at the back, okay? Proposed itineraries that you could follow, or you can make and design and curate your own and travel. And all these have been loaded on our tourism platforms, both for government and the private sector. So you have no excuse not to visit your country, to say that you don't know how to get to these places. They are here, they are digital. You can download them onto your phone and go. You have no excuse to say you don't know where to stay, you don't know where to eat, you don't know where to get a medical service or police help or anything. This is a directory that has every information imaginable to any destination. So there is no reason why Ugandans can't travel, why you can't encourage your friends out of the country to come and travel with you, or give them information and they travel alone if you don't have the time. And This services directory, they cover both the high-end, medium, low-end, even your homestays, even houses, private houses of people who can accommodate people. So the information is out there. Please utilize it. Love your country, tour your country. Uganda is a very beautiful and endowed place. Love it. Definitely, it will take away that wrong perception they have been having. The gap has been information, and information that can be got. Before, this type of information, you have to buy it from the bookshop. So it's already prohibitive. But this is free information on our virtual platforms, on our digital platforms, and it costs you nothing. Just equip yourself with the information. So there's no cost to it. Yes.
My name's James Rutalo. I am the Tourism Component Coordinator under the Competitiveness and Enterprise Development Project. It's a World Bank funded project under the ministry. The ministry is a beneficiary on one of the components that is specifically tourism competitiveness and product development. I am the immediate former director for tourism, wildlife and antiquities, but retired, and I'm now working on a project. So you're welcome. I have been asked to give an overview of the Uganda tourism sector in light of external funding. And this is one of the activities in commemoration of the World Tourism Day that will come on the 27th of September, where Uganda is expected to join the rest of the world to celebrate it, and whose main focus is to foster awareness among the global community on the importance of tourism and its social, cultural, political, and economic value. And this year's theme is tourism for inclusive growth. And of course, we are told it will be an opportunity to look beyond the statistics. Unfortunately, we are celebrating the World Tourism Day in the midst of a pandemic, and therefore many of the assumptions that were made with regard to the topic that I'm going to focus on have been affected, because they have affected the economy, they have affected government releases and earning. The presentation is the Ugandan tourism sector in light of external funding, and I'm required to give insights on how the tourism sector is achieving sustainable development goals through partnerships with the global community. And this is aimed at ensuring that we have inclusive growth, and we look at the public sector, the private sector, and the communities that live close to the tourism resources or products that we have in Uganda. Allow me to briefly focus on the following 5 areas with regard to this presentation. I'll give a very brief overview of the tourism sector, but of course skewing it towards the topic that you've asked me to deliver. I'll look at the Uganda's comprehensive policy and planning framework, because these are the ones that form the basis for Uganda to implement international instruments, international policy frameworks, and they are the basis on which donors come to provide support. We look at resource mobilization in terms of how do we do it, in terms of making sure that whatever appears in the comprehensive policy framework is broken down into activities that are annualized. We look at the key country and development partner frameworks that are the basis for our cooperation with the development partners, for them to be able to provide funding for the tourism sector. I finally also look at the challenges that we have experienced. It is useful to give you a little bit of an insight on the challenges, because we had initial assumptions which are no longer tenable given what has happened. Now, in terms of the tourism sector, it looks at how do we sell Uganda, how do we attract people to Uganda, and in doing so, we provide services. As we do so, we create jobs. We resolve issues that we have come out to focus on in the development framework, and that's poverty alleviation. So tourism is government-led, but private sector-driven. What do we mean by government-led? Government brings out the policies and regulations, the guidelines. It provides the last-mile infrastructure. It markets the country. It provides safety, and of course ensures the quality of the tourism products and services that we are going to ensure that we give out as a country to our visitors. So tourism focuses on the source and the destination. Uganda happens to be the destination, but there are source markets, and Uganda must market itself in the source markets if they are to get people coming to visit. And therefore we are able to contribute to the bigger result of increasing household incomes, creating jobs, and reducing poverty. Now, tourism in Uganda has the potential to contribute to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So those are some of the key areas that we contribute to as a sector. For the sake of this presentation, allow me to read them. Goal 1, which is zero poverty. Goal 2, which is gender equality. And remember the theme of this year's celebration that calls for this. There is Goal 7, which talks about access to affordable, reliable, and sustainable and modern energy. Goal 8, which is decent work and economic growth. Goal 12, which is responsible consumption and production. Goal 13, which is climate actions. Remember, we have our major products being wildlife, and they are in very fragile environments. Goal 14, which is sustainable use of oceans and marine resources. We have one of the biggest lakes in Africa, which is a tourism product, and we have to ensure that we have sustainably used it. And Goal 5, which is to protect, restore, and promote sustainable use of terrestrial ecosystems. Many of our protected areas are in savanna areas, and then we have to sustainably manage our forests. We have forest national parks, and we have to protect against degradation and biodiversity loss. The tourism sector, I will only quote statistics for 2017, has grown steadily. And in 2017, we received 1.4 million arrivals, and the sector accounted for 7.3% of Uganda's gross domestic product. We created more than 600,000 jobs in the sector, and the sector was the leading foreign exchange earner, and in 2017 generated 1.4 billion. What are the challenges? And I bring out the challenges because they are the basis for us to have plans and strategies that we put out there for the donors to come and fund. Our assets, our tourism assets, are biodiversity based, and some of them are cultural. Unfortunately, they are underutilized because of the limited participation of the private sector. Remember, I told you that it is government-led, but is private sector driven. If you do not have the private sector participating, then you do not have a sector that is vibrant. Now, the other key challenge is that the last mile public infrastructure investments in national parks and others limit the scope of investments Do we have the right roads to these protected areas? Do we have the right ICT systems and framework? Do we have the correct safety? Do we have the right products? Do we have the right quality in those that come and invest in our areas? Now, the ministry is cognizant of the fact that it has to execute its mandate and has appreciated the requirement to collaborate with stakeholders, including donors. And to do so, it is guided by the Comprehensive National Policy and Planning Framework. The key policy framework is Vision 2040 that was approved by government in 2007. And the key theme of that vision is to have a transformed Ugandan society, transforming it from a peasant to a modern and prosperous country within 30 years. Now, to do so, it provides development paths, it provides strategies, and it operationalizes that vision through actions and strategies. It identified tourism as one of the opportunities in addition to oil and gas, ICT, minerals, business, labor force, and so on. This vision is implemented by 5-year national development plans that aim to propel Uganda from within the medium to long term. Now, the other aspects of the comprehensive national planning framework include the tourism sector policies and plans. It would be useful for one to know that, for example, right now, we have the Ministry's Strategic Plan 2020-2021 to 2024-2025, and it provides the basis for which the Ministry seeks to achieve medium-term and long-term tourism development through wildlife and cultural heritage conservation. Now, it aligns with NDP3 and the vision that I have talked about, plus the NRM manifesto. All these ensuring that we have a synchronized way of developing the country, but using tourism as a program. Now, this sector investment plan, as you might already be aware, because it is implementing NDP3. NDP3 ceased to look at sectors, it looks at programs. So it moves away from that silo approach to an alignment across government. It adopts a cross-sector approach. It looks at issues of coordination and exploiting synergies. Now, it also helps in the monitoring and evaluation of those results that one seeks to achieve through projects that are implemented. Now, the sector investment plan, like I said, is to help us implement the targets of NDP3, for example, now, which is program-based. And remember, NDP3 is implementing Vision 2040. So those are the planning frameworks that at national level we look at. Now, in terms of donor resource mobilization strategies for the tourism sector, we focus on country and development partner frameworks, especially those that are relevant to the tourism sector. These might be multilateral or bilateral. An example of a multilateral framework is the enhanced integrated framework that right now is supporting the ministry under the Handicraft and Souvenir Development Project. And I think you've already had a discussion with them. So that is an example of a framework where we are using a multilateral approach to help Uganda develop the communities as partners through crafts and souvenirs. There are bilateral frameworks. We have the United Nations Sustainable Development Cooperation Framework. We have the US-Uganda Country Cooperation Strategy, 2016-2021. And we have the Uganda Country Partnership Framework with the World Bank. These are the ones that guide the tourism sector in terms of developing resources or strategies and projects that we put out there to show donors that we are implementing sustainable development goals as part of our contribution. And given that their agendas look at those countries that will contribute to those, then the donors come into focus on what we have done as Uganda. I've already given the example of the enhanced integrated framework. Now, of particular importance for the tourism sector is the World Bank Uganda Country Partnership Framework, on the basis of which we have had two important projects. The first one is the Competitiveness and Enterprise Development Projects, the one I told you where I'm the tourism component coordinator. Now, this one has helped Uganda to focus on the achievements, especially with regard to the Sustainable Development Goals. With regard to tourism, it is helping us to address the governance challenges. Remember, government leads, but one of its focuses is to provide governance for the sector. So it focuses on the governance challenges within the tourism sector. The other challenge that this comprehensive framework is looking at are the infrastructure deficits. Remember, this project is supposed to help government put these two in place so that we attract the private sector to invest within tourism. Now, the World Bank is supporting government to address those two. And SEDEP is part of the project that is implemented under the Comprehensive Country Partnership Framework. It seeks to strengthen Uganda's core tourism offerings and to leverage our tourism assets for private sector-led growth. And this will be achieved through 4 outputs. One of them is upstream planning, policy and regulatory capacity building. The second one is targeted infrastructure improvements to incentivize private sector-led management and revenue generation. The third one is to use incentives for the ministry to mobilize private investment. These are called the disbursement-linked indicators, that government is required to achieve certain targets if it is to get the next batch of funding. The fourth one is to look at local hiring and training of youth. In the case of the tourism sector, we have 2 training institutions. One is in Jinja, that's the Uganda Hotel and Tourism Training Institute. The other one is the Uganda Wildlife Research and Training Institute, based in Kasese. Those 2 will help in the delivery of this output. Now, all our activities require that we do assessment of climate change vulnerabilities and require us to propose specific measures where we would reduce carbon footprint of especially the infrastructure that will be developed under this project. Now, of course, this project recognizes the contribution of the sector, and I will not get back to there. Now, some of the benefits we hope to get out of this will be a tourism information management system. This is provide data that is needed by the private sector to do investments, because we are trying to attract investment. But it also guides the government on what information, what monitoring and evaluation to carry out based on the proper statistics. And it is this system that will generate it. We hope to have improved management performance, especially of the ministry and its core tourism-related institutions, through enhanced planning, coordination, training, promotion of the country, and awareness building. Now, the project also is completing activities that were started under the original SEDEP. This component, this one now that we are implementing is called the SEDEP additional funding. The original project started, I think, in 2013, and provided infrastructure for the Uganda Hotel and Training Institute. It is building a 3-star hotel. They have completed 50 rooms. Now the additional funding is required to do an additional 30 rooms for that hotel. So that is part of the completion of the activities, but to also make those that were started under the original SEDEP much more sustainable. Now, in terms of the objective, it is to support measures that will increase private sector investment in the sector, but also to strengthen the effectiveness of the land system, because the lands is the other component in addition to tourism. It focuses on outcomes that will be directly attributable to the project and will allow for implementation. Now, what are the challenges with regard to SEDEP AF? Because this is where donors are coming in. Now, usually these projects have to be declared effective. Now, for them to be declared effective, governments must put in place certain frameworks. Now, the project was delayed by over 14 months. And so the original assumptions that we would be able to make a number of achievements have been affected by the delay in 14 months. But you also know that we've had COVID, especially the second wave, which has affected Uganda's earnings. It has affected the way people and tourists come into the country. And so the results framework, where we thought that by implementing this project we would increase the visitation of visitors or tourists to Uganda, has been affected. It has to be reviewed because there was a lockdown in terms of those that could travel. So the project was declared, the project appraisal document came out before COVID, and those are some of the challenges that must be addressed because these were not foreseen. The budget cuts were not foreseen. So in terms of donor financing of the tourism sector, that is a key project. The other key project under World Bank that is using the same comprehensive framework is called investment or investing in forests and protected areas for climate smart development. Now, this is implemented by the Ministry of Water and Environment, the ministry here, UWA, and the National Forest Authority. Now, it is based on the fact that both UWA and NFA, or Uganda Wildlife Authority, and the National Forest Authority recognizes that more value could be generated from protected areas through tourism, and they have identified the need for improved tourism infrastructure. Just like we have said that government must provide the last mile infrastructure if you have to attract the private sector to come and invest. Now, the project development objective of this one is to promote sustainable management of forests and protected areas for increased benefits to communities from forests, especially in the Albertine Rift, for eradication of increased vulnerability of economic productivity, biodiversity, and livelihoods to climate change effects due to declining forestry and ecosystems, goods and services. I think you know that one of the issues affecting Uganda is deforestation. And with forests going away, we have issues of climate change that come with us. So this is a 6-year project, and will be primarily implemented in 37 districts that are surrounding 7 national parks. It will be implemented in 4 wildlife reserves. It will be implemented in 28 central forest reserves, and 16 of which are refugee hosting districts. Refugees are known for cutting down trees in order to get fuel, wood fuel. And briefly, that is what the Ugandan tourism sector would talk about with regard to external funding. So the key issues in there have been that we must rely on Uganda's comprehensive national planning framework, which is guided by global frameworks. We must rely on us having developed partnerships with development partners on the frameworks that form the basis of the projects that we would be implementing. So briefly, that is what we would have. And for us during the World Tourism Day, inclusive growth would mean that we have made a contribution through one SEDEP, the Handicraft and Souvenir Development Project, as well as the investments in forest and protected area systems for climate smart development. I think I'll end my brief talk here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I don't think I have a question for you.
Okay.
I have.
Oh, sure.
You've talked about funding. How much funds do you need?
That's a very difficult question. To do what? Now, that is why under NDP3 you talk about project-based development. You fund projects. So with regard to specific projects, we determine the amount of funding. For example, under SEDEP AF, it's about $100 million, but shared between two institutions. That is SEDEP, that is the Ministry of Lands, as well as Tourism. So, but because it's a project, it's project-based, the cost is 100. But it does not look at everything or all the challenges within the two sectors. The other one is looks at wildlife protected areas and forests only as a project and focuses on a particular scope. The best source of the total funding required, which I don't have offhand, can be obtained from the National Development Plan 3, because I think it is costed and it's supposed to be implemented within 5 years. But the total cost for the next 30 years, that is contained within Vision 2040, because it looks at a wider scope. And unfortunately, I do not have those costs of head, but the sources are those planning frameworks.
Thank you very much.
My name is Doreen Katusime. I am the Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Tourism, Wildlife and Antiquities. Now, it is common knowledge that prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, the ministry or the sector as tourism was the highest foreign exchange earner for the government of Uganda. Tourism was contributing almost 8% to the GDP, bringing in about $1.6 billion into the economy. Tourist arrivals alone for the year 2020, from the figures that we shared from the Uganda Bureau of Statistics, shows that we were getting about 1.5 million arrivals for the year 2019. At least those are the figures we have. But now, after the COVID pandemic, the surveys and some of the information we have for the year 2020 shows that the tourist arrivals, for example, dropped from 1.5 million to just slightly over 470,000 people. Now, that is a reduction of about 69.3% from 2019 alone to 2020. And so that means that the country only received a third of the figures of 2019, because the tourist arrivals of 2020, like I had said, dropped. And we have not seen this level of arrivals since the year like 2005. So we dropped to the figures of about 2005. Now, the foreign exchange earnings also, of course, were not spared. So we dropped almost threefold from 1.6 billion US dollars of earnings to about 0.5 billion US dollars, which is about 72.7% decline in the tourist foreign exchange earnings. So you can see that the sector, I don't know, I haven't got figures for the other sectors, but I can say it was probably the hardest hit. Now, visitation, the survey that we did as a sector, we looked at the different subsectors. For example, we'd look at hotels, we'd look at tour operators, we'd look at other subsectors along the value chain. So when we looked at visitation to the different tourist attractions for 2020, as a result of COVID, we had very serious reductions in numbers. We looked at the national parks. For example, for the national parks, the figures declined from 323,000 in 2019 to 101,000 in 2020. These were the numbers that were recorded, were last recorded in 2002. So we dropped to the figures of about 2002. Visitation to source of the Nile. Now, we just picked out like 3 examples. National parks, source of the Nile. Source of the Nile, the figures dropped from 157,000 in 2019 to 28,000 only in 2020. And for UWEC, which is our Wildlife Education Center, popularly known as the zoo, the figures dropped from 383,000 in 2019 to 67,000, again, which shows a major decline in visitations. So overall, the tourism sites in the country registered about 77% decline in tourism numbers. And for the national parks, of course, this has a very big blow because, as you may know, our agency, Uganda Wildlife Authority, which is responsible for conservation, depends almost 90% of its budget from revenues from tourism, from the entrance fees, from permits, gorilla permits, and so on and so forth. So their budget has been hardly hit. Now, we looked at accommodation facilities. These are, of course, private sector. And the country registered a decline in hotel room occupancy from about 51% to an average of 20%. So our occupancy rates before COVID were at about 51%. But even that 51%, by the way, is not for all parts of the country. You'll find maybe for the urban centers like Kampala, you have about 60%, then you have 20%, but on average. But even that dropped to about 20%. And of course, this means that the demand for supplies for agricultural products, for example, to these hotels also does what? Declines. And that's why, if you remember, during the first lockdowns, the prices for food really declined. So if you have been supplying eggs or vegetables to hotels, and hotels are closed for 3 months, so you can only sell these cheaply or make a very big loss. So this, it affects the entire value chain. So the prices of agricultural products and others that supply these accommodation facilities, of course, came down. And of course, this is in addition to the many jobs that were lost. So we also registered a lot of cancellation for bookings. About 90% of the hotel facilities experienced cancellations, and this led to loss of revenue amounting to about 320 million US dollars. International meetings, of course, there were no meetings during that period because everything was closed. So we lost a lot of revenue. We had, for example, a conference that was coming up, the UN G77 summit, which was supposed to take place in April 2020. This was cancelled. We were going to get participants from about 136 countries. And this is just one of the many examples. Loss of employment, about 70% of workers in the tourism industry had lost their jobs. And about 91% of the entities had downsized. So others had to lay off, others had to downsize the numbers. Tour operators, our survey showed that 9 in 10 tour operator businesses had registered client cancellations between March 2020 and June 2020. And as a result of these cancellations, tourism revenues in excess of 30 million had been lost in just the 4 months, that is March to June 2020. Now, I have already talked about the loss of tourism revenues to our MDAs. I've talked about Uganda Wildlife Authority. I've talked about UWEC. I've talked about, for example, the museum. Our Uganda Museum also collects revenue, but it was shut for those 3 months. Even when it opened up, of course, the numbers went down. So this has not only affected revenues to the private sector, but also revenues to the ministry and its agencies. Yeah. Now, after the first lockdowns, things started coming up again. Normally, in the tourism sector, our peak season is usually July to September, October. But even before that, we started seeing some recovery, especially in as far as domestic tourism is concerned. I think because many Ugandans used to love to travel outside the country, now they couldn't travel to Dubai and Mombasa. So we were beginning to see some recovery. So we did another survey around March 2021. But maybe I should start by talking about what did we do as government, even before the recovery. What did we do? What did we put in place? First of all, I think we were the first sector to issue standard operating procedures. If you remember, we had a launch of the standard operating procedures. And of course, we were working with the government, with the other ministries, Ministry of Health specifically. So the hotels, the restaurants, the bars of course have been closed, but entertainment centers and others, we had to issue and also monitor the use of these SOPs. In addition to that, government came up with a few other measures. For example, taxes. Government waived tax, VAT to be specific. We had already had a waiver for VAT for accommodation facilities in the upcountry, but now this was extended also to the hotels in Kampala and elsewhere. And in addition to that, we were able to negotiate some money, some stimulus package. The sector, driven actually by the private sector, but working with us, were able to get 6 million euros from the European Union. But in discussion with government, Minister of Finance guided that this money should be put in UDB, since it's a government bank, and it was the one that was managing stimulus packages. So this money was given to UDB, but UDB had to top it up with its own money so that it can lend to these struggling businesses to be able to recover. We have had a few complaints from the private sector, seeing the conditionalities, the conditions given were stringent. Also, since the money given by European Union was a grant, they are not satisfied that then it should have been tagged to a loan. But we know a number of them have already benefited, but there have been major complaints which we are trying to address, and still in discussions with government to see if a specific stimulus package can be given for tourism. And then, of course, government intensified promotional campaigns for domestic tourism through our agency, Uganda Tourism Board. You must have heard about the Take on the Pearl. We did a virtual tourism expo, the Pearl of Africa Tourism Expo. And we are also working on other products that can especially encourage Ugandans to visit their own country. We are working on several cultural. There is a lot of demand now and interest in cultural tourism. People come from out. Yes, they will go to the national parks, but they also want to know more about the culture of the people and how they live and the cultural heritage. So we are putting in quite some money in our cultural sites. We are also putting in money in developing and improving our training institutions to be able to get the caliber of of staff that are competitive within the region and internationally. So we are upgrading Uganda Hotel and Training Institute in Jinja. We are also upgrading our school in Kasese, the Uganda Wildlife Research and Training Institute, because manpower, skilled manpower is really critical for the sector. Yeah, that's about it. And of course, we continue to put in a lot of effort in the conservation activities. And you see what happens when there is a pandemic like this and you have lockdowns and you don't have a lot of people visiting the national parks, for example. Now the poachers also want to take advantage of that. So you find there is a heightened activity in terms of poaching, illegal wildlife trade. So we had to also heighten our strength in that area. We are also working with the Uganda Uganda National Roads Authority and CA to see how we can prioritize tourism roads. Tourism infrastructure, basically. Roads, aerodromes, and power. Working with this. So those are the major areas of focus.
Yeah, we still have a challenge of domestic tourism. Many people understand it. They still are thinking that it's for European countries. How is the ministry doing this to see that Ugandans
You're very right. There is, I think, a mindset that when you talk of a tourist, people think of a foreigner. It's for tourists, yet we can all be tourists within the country. So what we have realized is there are two major things. One is information. We probably hadn't done enough in terms of giving out information. For example, many Ugandans think that it's very expensive to go to the national parks. They do not know that there are rates for the foreign tourists and then rates for Ugandans. And yet it takes about 25,000 for a Ugandan to enter the national park. But they still think that they have to pay a lot of dollars. So we are trying as much as possible to share information now. Uganda Wildlife Facilities is now working closely with Uganda Tourism Board to put out as much information. But the campaigns I was also telling you about, we now had to come up with specific campaigns, for example, on digital platforms, because we want to attract especially the youth, like you people, so that they do a challenge. For example, UTB would put up a site, pictures of a particular site, and say, whoever answers these questions right will win a trip. Now, when others see this person enjoying themselves at CP Falls, for example, then they will also want to go. So we are actually going to heighten the marketing and promotion of domestic tourism. But the second aspect to it is I think, affordability. When we went out to ask, most people were saying it is still very expensive to travel. The hotels are still very expensive. So we want to keep that discussion with our own hoteliers and other tour operators, if they can have specific packages that are interesting and affordable. Because we have also realized that the interests are not the same. When the Ugandans travel, they want to enjoy, they want loud music, it's not like the foreigners who want and they just want to be in that wilderness and be in that quiet. For this, maybe we have seen the wilderness for so long. So that has been the problem, coming up with packages that are targeted to the interests of the Ugandan market. So we are celebrating World Tourism Day, joining the rest of the world actually, because it is World Tourism Day on 27th September. We have been doing this for a long time, and in the past we've been rotating the celebrations. So each year we'll do a different region. Last year we were in the east, now we're planning to go north. Maybe the other year we'll go to the east, but of course now because of the pandemic, we're not able to celebrate the way we used to. So this is going to be a hybrid, digital and physical. So it will have a small presence, but we want the message to go out there that tourism is recovering. The pandemic, yes, may be here to stay, but we need to learn to live with the new normal. So we have got to continue observing the SOPs, but we can still enjoy the different attractions of Uganda. So I want to encourage Ugandans that Uganda is for them, it's for Ugandans to enjoy. It's not just for foreign tourists. There are a lot of affordable things. There are a lot of interesting things to see, not just only the animals. So we want this World Tourism Day to take out that message, and that's why the theme is about inclusive growth. We don't want anybody to be left behind. The mandatory testing hasn't actually started. It's being discussed. It is something that the Ministry of Health has come up with that proposal, and this is backed by science. They think that the rate at which the virus is mutating, we are at the risk of importing another variant which could be more dangerous. So they are proposing that we do mandatory testing. But as of now, as I speak, we are not doing mandatory testing. Every traveler who is coming in with full vaccination and a negative PCR test doesn't get tested. But the mandatory testing, according to what Cabinet discussed last week, is right now they are looking at the facilities at Entebbe to prepare the airport so that it's possible, if we are going to do mandatory testing, to test people at the airport, because before that, the tests were being done away from the airport at some beach. But also, government has decided if it's going to be done, it will be done by government, not by the private providers who were doing it before. And thirdly, the cost will come down now from $65 to $30, so that it's at least more affordable, but it will also be more convenient. And now, for tourists, Cabinet decided, I think you had the President also saying it, will be given a different kind of treatment. So if you're a tourist and you're coming in and you have a tour operator that has prepared your itinerary, they will take your sample, but you will go. You will not have to stay at the airport. So you can go and stay in your hotel and wait for your results. If the results come out positive, of course, the Ministry of Health will now take the necessary measures to put you either in a hospital or in isolation. So it hasn't started, but we are working around with all the relevant ministries and agencies to see that it's done. It doesn't cause too much inconvenience to the travelers. It is likely to affect the sector because we have had several reports from the different tour operators especially saying they have received several cancellations. They are saying, and the people who are cancelling are citing the mandatory testing. But then the mandatory testing has not started. But maybe it is the way we have shared the information. So we have had those reports. They have been sharing with us some messages coming from their potential clients saying they cannot come if they are going to have to undergo this mandatory testing. But I think that was also based on the conditions at the airport, because if you're going to take me, I arrive at midnight, you take me to a beach, I sit there for another 4 hours waiting for tests, and yet I have already spent a lot of money on my ticket, on my visa, on my hotel. So it is causing serious concern, and we are still under a lot of pressure from the private sector in tourism to say government should review this decision. So yes, it has affected, because I know there have been a lot of cancellations. But I think at the same time, we also have to be mindful of what the scientists are saying. If they're saying we need to guard against importing this, then everything possible that can be done should be done to protect lives. You can only do business when you are alive.